So we're in the midst of a week-long, I shouldn't say midst, we're at the end of a week-long training. And even though this particular message will be released on Monday, it is a Friday as I am delivering it. And it's been a very special week. We It's just, it's always tough. I think it's a challenge as a leader we invest so much. We get to know each other in such a fast way and such a beautiful way. And then you guys are already taken off. And I don't know who came up with the idea of a week long. What a stinky idea that is. So I was hinting at the fact to some of you that we could extend it and, make it like a 2 or 3 week long and, just cancel flights and figure out a way to make this happen. So, it's just been very special, and I just want to say thank you to all of you that have been here. You guys joined in the midst of this series on the Wright Brothers, and so we're in episode 17, which is a strange spot. You guys joined for episode 16 and 17. It's a strange place, but hey, that's your choice. You came to the week long, right? Smack in the middle of a series. And it's been a very fun series. There's been a lot of just deep inspiration. If you go back through this series, there's some real big gold nuggets in it. This is a special nugget. I know from my life, this idea of what I'm calling Huffman Prairie is a significant truth. And the lens that I carry towards history, I think, surprises other people. I just thought that everyone sees the same things I do. When I'm looking at history, I'm seeing all these, it's like, oh, that's an amazing idea. That's a truth that I totally relate to. And I have recognized in doing these Daily Thunder series that not everyone has the same lens I do, which is part of what has made these Daily Thunder series special, is people are like, wow, I've never thought that before. And for me, I just love history. I love story. And it gives language to the spiritual journey I have. And it gives me almost like a grip on truths. And so I think this has the potential to be one of those grip points for you. Because Huffman Prairie is something God takes all of us through. It's a very real place in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. It's where the Wright brothers were born, grew up, and lived out their life. Most of what they have done so far in this series actually isn't in Dayton, even though they are going to do things in Dayton in the early part. They have a bicycle shop in Dayton. But all of this flight work, where they're creating these flying machines and they're testing these flying machines, that's all been taking place in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in the middle of nowhere, the wilderness, truly. And the reason they chose Kitty Hawk was very specifically for its wind. It is constantly windy in Kitty Hawk. It's in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't want to do this in front of people. And it's sandy, sand hills everywhere. So they could go to a high hill, they can catch the wind, and they can test their gliders and then land in sand. Sand is a lot more pleasant than concrete to land on. And so it has been a great zone for them to train. Kitty Hawk, if I had a whole episode just on Kitty Hawk too, because that to me is symbolic as well of the season apart, of the season where God is training us in private, in a hidden way. And it's hard. Kitty Hawk is one difficult place to hang out. And so Huffman Prairie is very different. It's a different season of our spiritual development. So let's dive into this, part 17. Psalm 37:23. The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. Oh, nice statement there. This George Mueller is going to tack on in his Bible. He is going to make a comment on this, and I'll sort of see if I can give you the George Mueller edition in his Bible. He says, the steps and the stops, he writes in his margin, of a good man are ordered of the Lord. And that's what this message is on. It's the stops of the Lord, not just the steps. But sometimes God is going to bring you into a spot where you're like not really wanting to be there, and yet God will keep you there for a season. And this isn't where you really want to be. God, I want to be here. The Wright brothers, for all practical purposes, are ready to change the world with what they've discovered. And yet right after they discover it, their plane, as I may have mentioned last time, but I mentioned a couple episodes ago in a message called 12 Seconds, when they originally catch flight. They are going to, on December 17th, 1903, do it. They're really going to do it for 12 seconds and 120 feet. I know, not that impressive, right? But it was actually human-controlled flight. It worked. Then they're going to do 3 more short flights after that. This is working. And then they're going to try and fly to the weather station. They're going to be able to start to show this off. More people can see what we've done, and the wind is going to gust. It's going to catch their flying machine and blow it, and it's going to crash into a heap. They never flew it again. Now they're in this season where they come back to Dayton, and they recognize that to retool and to build their next flyer, they need to have something a little closer to home, and they need to be able to test it in weather that isn't just constantly windy. They need to have the variables of normal life to be able to test it. So they're entering into a new season. I'm going to call it Huffman Prairie because that's where they're going to do their testing. Sort of like the first airport in world history is Huffman Prairie. So the steps and the stops of a good man are ordered of the Lord. So this is just a little ditty on that same phrase that George Mueller is going to pick up on. God has a purpose in all his holdups. On the margin of his Bible at this verse, Psalm 37:23, George Mueller had a notation, and the stops also. It is a sad mistake for men to break through God's hedges. Just want to stop on that because that could sound a little strange, but it's quite profound, and I've been just meditating upon even this statement. It is a sad mistake for men to break through God's hedges. Now, a hedge, we think of like, a bush that creates a hedge and it creates a division point or like a blockage between one yard and the next. But God will sometimes, in line with the reasoning here, put up a hedge in our life saying, I want you to stay here for this season. And we don't want to stay here. So we want to break through that hedge. We want to get out of this zone. It is a sad mistake for men to break through God's hedges. It is a vital principle of guidance for a Christian never to move out of the place in which he is sure God has placed him until the pillar of cloud moves. So when God brings us to that place, if you've ever been in a season where it's just like, you can't really argue that God probably has led you here, but you really wish you could have a fast forward button and go zzz and get to the end of it, because this is not easy. This is a challenge place. The Wright brothers are going to step into Huffman Prairie. And believe me, they wish they had a fast forward button. What they're going to accomplish in their life is fairly well known to most, if not all of us in here, and it's extraordinary. But this is a season where everything that I truly admire in these men is going to be proven. Huffman Prairie, prairie spelled wrong. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm very sorry about that. The place where the pillar of cloud stopped. So the pillar of cloud is leading these two. I mean, it's truly remarkable. The inspiration that these two have is truly astounding. And this pillar of cloud is going to move and move and move, and it's going to land, in Huffman Prairie? So listen to Psalm, I have a few mistakes in this keynote already. This is not the right scripture reference for this. So when the cloud tarried, then the children of Israel journeyed not. This is my same scripture reference from before. So I think I'm already to 2. I hope you guys aren't counting how many mistakes I have in my keynote, because I am, and we don't need any more than me counting. Huffman Prairie, spelled right, by the way. I just want you guys to notice the good things that are in this keynote as well. The place where you grow smaller in order to do something bigger. Okay, I'm going to repeat that, guys. The place where you grow smaller in order to accomplish something bigger. Isn't that an interesting phrase? In other words, God will take us into seasons of diminishment to certain aspects of who we are. I can think of Moses being brought to the wilderness season where he's going to be a shepherd for 40 years. Did you know that according to Josephus, Moses was, first of all, he was raised in the courts of Pharaoh. So that means he was educated with the highest education of that time in the world, Egypt being the world's great power. And so he's going to be raised as royalty, trained as royalty, given the privileges of royalty. Then he's going to step into a military leadership position. One of the other great empires of that age were the Ethiopians. And the Ethiopians were the great threat, and no one could overcome them. And the Egyptians had no solution for the Ethiopians. Moses, a young Moses, is going to lead the Israelites. Boy, that didn't count as one of the mistakes. That was, he's going to lead the Egyptians against the Ethiopians and win. And he was known to the Egyptians as the mighty conqueror of the Ethiopians. Now, that's not in the Bible. That is going to be Jewish history under Josephus. Boy, I'm having a tough time this morning. I'm going to get in my groove. Don't worry, guys. But Josephus, who is a historian at the same time as Jesus Christ, back in first century Israel. And so what a thought, though, to think of a man who had that much esteem, that much clout, that much power is going to be minimized to be a shepherd in the backside of the wilderness for 40 years. And then God can use him in a mighty way. And that has to happen technically, guys, to all of us. All of us have to allow God to take us through a season of shrinkage so that he can use us in a greater way. Huffman Prairie, the place where you grow smaller in order to do something bigger. So the pillar of cloud had led the Wright brothers to Kitty Hawk in 1900. Now it had led them to Huffman Prairie, and there it stopped. It's like, God, could we get out of this place? It's funny because Kitty Hawk was very difficult at first for the Wright brothers. It was a very difficult season. If we go back to 1900, 1901, 1902, very difficult, but they are learning to love it. So they are thriving in this wilderness season. And it has done great work in their soul. But then the cloud moves, and they know it. They know it. They have this scrap heap of a flying machine, and they have to cart it back to Dayton. They know they have to rebuild their next one in Dayton, and they know that they have certain things to work on that have to be done in Dayton. They can't keep going back to Kitty Hawk. They know the cloud has moved. But this is a tough place to be, even though it's their hometown. Now, in the last message, I was basically talking about the hometown prophet principle, where, if, a prophet is never, acknowledged or appreciated in his hometown. And that's definitely true for these poor guys when they return back to Dayton. David McCullough says it this way: Huffman Prairie was nothing like Kitty Hawk, with its broad horizons, wind in abundance, and nearly total privacy. Here, in Huffman Prairie, the space to maneuver had clearly defined parameters. Barbed wire and trees lined the borders, and there were besides a number of trees within the pasture, including one 50-foot honey locust covered with thorns. See, now that might not make any difference to you. It's like, oh, it's nice to have that honey locust in the middle of the prairie. However, when you're trying to fly a flying machine, you don't really want this 50-foot honey locust in the middle of it. And so what they had were parameters, very limited. They couldn't go very far, and they had obstacles too. And it's like they're not that good at this thing called flying yet. So the field itself, as Wilbur said, was so full of groundhog hummocks, it might have been a prairie dog town. In addition, the electric interurban trolley line from Dayton to Columbus skirted one side of the property and so could provide passengers on board ample view of whatever might be going on. They don't want anyone gawking. They don't want anyone looking in. They're trying to figure things out. And when they're in Kitty Hawk, they can make mistakes and no one knows the difference. But here, there's gawkers. There's people looking. Don't like that. In order to upgrade their plane, the Wright brothers needed to step into a smaller zone marked by a lot more sneers and jeers. It's interesting because they had such a huge territory to work in, the wilderness. And now God's going to give them a very limited space, a smaller space, and that smaller space comes with a lot of strong opinions. This is not an easy season for these guys. David McCullough says it this way: the work to be done here, the brothers knew, could well be the final critical stage in the maturation of their whole idea. Here they would have to learn to do far more than what they had done at Kitty Hawk. They must master the art of launching themselves safely into the air, of banking and turning a motor-propelled machine, and landing safely. Therefore, Wilbur stressed they would have to learn to accommodate themselves to circumstances. Wouldn't it be nice if we actually had the same thought that we needed to accommodate ourselves to circumstances? You see, when we have a Huffman Prairie season in our life, we have a tendency to want to get out of it, not to accommodate ourselves to the new challenge. What would accommodate ourselves to the new challenge sound like for a Christian? All right, Lord, this is hard for me. This zone is uncomfortable for me. It's creating tension inside of me that I prefer not to have. I would rather go back to a previous season or fast forward to a new season. But this season is not really that pleasant. And so when we embrace the season we're in, God gives grace for that. There's a story in Rees Howell's Intercessor where he is on a foreign island. I can't remember where it was, but it's some like equator zone of the world. And he's with someone who has tuberculosis, and he's there to assist them. But he is given this like terrible location to live, which is full of bugs and it's dirty. And I think it was in a basement. I think it was called the Fisherman's Rest, if I remember correctly, in my vague recollection of this story. And it was very hard. And his first instinct was to be offended that they would stick him in such a dirty, miserable place. And he decided that he didn't want to leave this place until this Fisherman's Rest became heaven to him. And by the end of his stay there, he didn't want to leave. He had received grace for it, and it had become the vestibule of heaven to him. So for many of us, what we do is we want to rush out of a Huffman Prairie season instead of say, God, make this season precisely what you intend it to be. Because there's grace for every season, every location. Every time you get to a Huffman Prairie that you want to get out of, God will supply grace, but you have to be resolute to go after it. So remember, it's called Huffman Prairie. It's owned by a guy named Torrance Huffman. And I gave this quote in the last message, but just to give you an idea, even the guy leasing the property to them, or I guess allowing them to use the property, said in private to a fellow farmer about the Wright brothers, they're fools. Oh, that feels good. That feels good. How would you like it when that comes back to you? Yeah. Did you know that Torrance Huffman says that you guys are fools? It's like, oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that encouragement. Have you ever had people like that just feel it's helpful to you to know different things about what other people are saying about you and what other people are thinking about you? It's like, I appreciate that. I've had people that are concerned that I'm getting proud, so they'll say things like, yeah, I just want you to know I've never heard of you before this. It's like, well, thank you. That really, that makes me feel really good. I'm glad that you went out of your way to tell me that. But it's human. When we see anyone around us, some people are just blunt and some people don't have a filter and some people just feel like it's very helpful to knock people down instead of build them up. The Wright brothers were getting a lot of that in this little stretch. The principle of purposeful shrinkage, also known as pruning. So in the Bible, we actually have this principle of pruning. It's a Huffman Prairie season. God is building something in the Wright brothers, through the Wright brothers, that is going to change the world. And so right at this crucial point, right after they have actually accomplished what is remarkable, then they're going to walk through their most difficult season because they can't replicate it before anyone. So everyone's like, so you say you can fly, prove it. And yet all they can say is, well, we have this one picture, where the plane is like 2 feet off the ground just launching. And that was like our first flight. They're like, oh, really? How do we know that wasn't a wind and you're coming down off a hill and landing? I mean, there's no evidence other than these 5 sort of out in the boondocks guys that are like, no, I was there. Yeah, no, they flew like 120 feet. That just doesn't sound very impressive because a glider can go farther than that. So we don't believe you guys, long and short. So they've just accomplished something magnificent. And the next thing you know, even though they have real genuine life in this vine, the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a purposeful shrinkage, a pruning back of these boys. Why? Well, for the principle of pruning, so that they can bear much more fruit. So the principle of purposeful shrinkage, that's a weird way of describing it, I know, In gardening and agriculture, the lopping off the superfluous branches of trees, either for improving the trees or their fruit. There's a lot of motives for pruning, but there's something about the redirection or the full use of the energy of this vine. This vine has something called sap. And so when you have long branches, that sap is going all the way out to these long branches. When you bring in those branches, bring them to closer nodes in the boy, I'm having a tough time with my vocabulary even, in the vine, then it concentrates the energy more effectively and it uses it better. And it actually then creates more fruit. So this process is actually very good for a vine. For the branch itself, being cut back to a previous node is actually good for us, even though it looks like we are losing something at the time. The Wright brothers definitely look like they're losing something. They've accomplished something great, and the next, it gets trimmed back and no one believes them. How could this be an advantage? How could this be a step forward? So Dr. Miller in the Streams of the Desert says, pruning seems to be destroying the vine. That's the way we view it. The gardener appears to be cutting it all away, but he looks on into the future and knows that the final outcome will be the enrichment of its life and greater abundance of fruit. So purposeful lopping in order to improve the tree and the fruit. What a novel concept. So in my life, and I'm guessing some of you that have walked with God for a season understand this, that when you take a step forward with God, one of the first things that he'll oftentimes do is ask you to let go of something that maybe has defined you in the past, something that has taken up a lot of time in your life, and he will ask for things. And that, to be honest, not that easy. I remember for me, there's like in that first year of walking close with God, one of the issues was sports in my life. I went to college to play soccer, right? I was a sports maniac. I was one of those, how you can always tell an alcoholic where they drink alone, and so I was I don't know what the equivalent would be with sports, but I would watch Monday Night Football at college all by myself in the lobby. In other words, it's like, it wasn't just because I wanted to hang out with people. It's like I needed to know what was going on. I was a very avid Bronco fan, okay? So it was just, when John Elway retired, this is somewhat embarrassing, but I cried. It was a deep thing for me. This is my childhood. This is like I had so much wrapped up in this. And God had to touch that and say, Eric, there's a whole sector of your life that I would like to access, but it's being hogged up by your passion for sports. In other words, it's not that sports is evil. It's that it was taking up so much space in my focus and my concentration. I'm driving on the road. I want to hear sports talk radio. I want to hear someone else talk about it. They don't have a clue either. It's like, how are the Broncos going to win on Sunday? No one knows, but I want to hear what this guy has to say. I think they could win. I'm like, oh, why? I want to hear that. I used to get so mad at announcers that were anti-Bronco, like Howard Cosell. He was like the old announcer, and he never liked the Broncos, and I picked up on that. He's against the Broncos. I got so mad at that guy. I want to hear someone say something good, so I would turn off the television sound, and I'd turn on the Broncos radio station so I could hear a biased report. I want to hear someone that likes the Broncos, right? So this is just my world. God had to lop it. He had to shrink me down so that I could better use the time that I have, better use this life that he's given me so I'm not spreading it out into things I shouldn't. So I had a lot of things like that. Relationships in this first season of my life, God's going to lop that off. It's like, Eric, could you focus on me? And not constantly be thinking about who you could be in a relationship with. Okay, now there's some single people in here that would probably understand that very clearly, that there can be a lot of mental energy, a lot of emotional energy invested, which is why a pruning can be very, very important in a season, because it's not that relationships are bad. It's just that notion of trying to figure it out can actually take the energy of what God has given you, that focus, and it actually can misspend it in your life. Okay, there's loads of things like this that can just take us into a distraction. In the past few years, I've gone in and out of needing to be corrected over news feeds. Okay, I don't know if news feeds affect any of you, but news feeds, especially when the world is changing and there's all sorts of interesting things happening, and you get into the I must know mode, it can again be a misexpenditure of your focus and your time. And God will sometimes, very reasonably, ask us to trim things out. Some of you, it could be social media. And so you're spending so much of your time and your mental energy in this social media sector that God will sometimes say, hey, we need to trim that out because that is taking part of your life that is meant for me, and you're spending it improperly. And so pruning is regaining that core strength into the areas that matter most, and it creates more fruit. Eric and Leslie's journey from Kitty Hawk to Huffman Prairie. It's a funny way of saying it. In 2009, we stopped traveling and speaking in order to disciple, going from speaking to tens of thousands to tens. It was a huge shrinkage point for us to transition into this ministry. And it was actually a very unique, to be honest, we were very happy about it. But in this story, I can't imagine anyone would want to stay in Huffman Prairie very long. But this was like a Huffman Prairie in a very different way. It was a trimming down of our life and our voice. Our books sold extremely well when we were speaking to tens of thousands. Think about that. And our books don't sell as well when we speak to tens here at Ellerslie. And so it massively impacted us because that was our income. We were authors. So the choices that we were making were very hard, and our revenue came in from honorariums and different money we would make from traveling, speaking, and from books. And suddenly we're like, lop, lop, lop. And those branches are coming off, but the vine and the life of the Spirit of God and the sap was still in us. And so what God is going to do is he's going to ultimately strengthen us through that focus. Like I look at the growth curves of my life, and they always come from a big step of being willing to give something up and being willing to trim down to a previous node in my life. It's like become smaller and trust that God is going to take that sap in my life and use it in a greater way. But it doesn't make it easy. It can be very, very hard in so many regards. I remember when we first came off the road and we were in our transition mode where we had to, because we would schedule our events oftentimes over a year out. And so we had to know that we were stopping, so we started saying no, and we no longer were putting anything into our schedule, but that date kept getting closer and closer where we had nothing in our schedule, and we would have zero income. It's like, okay, we're doing this, God. It's one thing to just suddenly one day wake up and have zero income. That's challenging, right? But it's a whole different thing when you see zero income on the horizon. It's like, all right, so we're coming closer to zero income. God, I'm assuming you have a solution. So what's interesting in our case, like how God addressed even the first step with this, is we were making all of our money over travel and selling product at our book table. That's how we did. That was just, we had an event system, and that's how we were making it. We had written a book, I don't know what it was at the time. I want to say maybe 3 years earlier, and it had been a bestseller, but when in the book publishing world, that doesn't necessarily mean you just get a check from the publisher, the moment your book starts selling well. There's this process. First of all, you oftentimes have received in advance, and then it has to overcome a certain point, and then there's a delay in when you get paid. We had not received a dime since our book had done so well. It was on the bestseller for a long time, and it's like, well, great, but it doesn't actually practically benefit us. So that's not even in my head at this time. I'm staring at the fact that our last event, it was somewhere like March, and I don't even remember the year, early 2000s sometime. And maybe it was even late 1990s. And it's like, okay, final date on the calendar. We're transitioning. All right, we just transitioned. We have no money. And it was like, days after that where I'm like praying and I'm like, dear Lord, I've trusted you. We're doing this because we believe you and we want to be obedient. But you do know that there are practical needs on this earth, and Eric needs them now. And a check arrives in the mail from the publisher. It was our first check we ever received for royalties. It happened right after, days after we had our last event. And I've watched this happen, guys. I've watched this happen that when I'm willingly going to walk into a pruning season, that God is going to take that choice and he's going to magnify himself through it in some way. But it doesn't make it easy. John 15:2, every branch that bears fruit, the Father prunes that it may bear more fruit. So this is just a spiritual principle, guys. Pruning just goes with the territory of being a believer. And so Huffman Prairie is a part of the believer's course. It just is. So the more we can learn to embrace Huffman Prairie instead of complain about Huffman Prairie, the better growth we're going to have in our spiritual lives. Gideon. This is a fun way of saying it. So Gideon, if you guys remember, is going to start out with 30,000 men, and God's going to say it's too many. Now, it's too many. The Midianites have I don't remember if it was 185,000 to 218,000. It's somewhere in that. If you could say those are weird numbers to pick. There's a reason why I can't remember which one it is, but it's something like that. Okay, it's at the very high 200,000 range of soldiers, and Gideon has 30,000, and that's too many. So if you're mathematical, you're going to be a little offended by that, God. God. You need to recognize we have a fraction of what they have already. We are like 1/7 their power. And he goes, yeah, too much, because you could win and then think it was you that did it. So I need to trim that down. This is a purposeful pruning. So 30,000 to 300 to amazing. This is a pattern in our life where we go from 30,000, which doesn't seem like it's enough anyways. Have you ever had that thought? It's like, God, you need to realize you're pruning me, but I was already feeling rather thin. Now you're pruning me because it's too much. And so you go from 30,000 to 300. What's next? Amazing. Something amazing comes out of that pruning. The more fruit comes out. David McCullough says it this way. Prior to their first test flight on Monday, May 23rd, 1904, so it's 1904, they're going to discover flight December 17th, 1903. So now they're back in Dayton and they're working on their next flying machine. And this is going to be a challenge for them. And so they're going to, but prior to their first test flight, which is going to be in May of that year, lest anyone think them overly secretive, the brothers invited friends and neighbors to come and watch. It's like, okay, this is a big step for them. It's like, all right, no one seems to believe it, so we're going to allow friends and neighbors to come, and they can witness us do this. Okay, remember what happened in Kitty Hawk? All right, we've built even a better flyer now. And now it's not Kitty Hawk, so we don't have the sand, we don't have the winds. All right, we're going to do this. But they don't want to be overly secretive. They're trying to figure out how they engage with this Dayton world that seems to question everything they're doing. So they invite them to come. So May 23rd, 1904, everyone comes out. And I don't remember the reason. All we know is that the flight was postponed. Okay, that's awkward. That's a rough way to start. You're trying to sort of set this new pattern in place, and flight is postponed. May 25th, 1904, we're doing it. It's canceled due to rain. Sorry, guys. And then May 26th, 1904, Flyer 2, which was the name for this particular airplane, it rose 8 feet and came down at once. Something wrong with motor. All right, sort of a rough beginning here, guys. I don't know how you're feeling about your new pruned season at Huffman Prairie. So listen to David McCullough say this. It was hardly a premiere to stir excitement or silence the doubters. Oh, this is painful, guys. This is painful because you know what happened in Kitty Hawk. And yet, God doesn't seem to be allowing it to showcase in the way that you envision. Have you ever had it where it's like, God, if you did it this way, you would get so much glory. Oh, I have an idea for you, God. You could do this, and then this would happen, and everyone would go, oh, God is great. Instead, that happens, where something's wrong with the motor, rises 8 feet and just plops back down to the ground, and everyone's like, is this what we're calling flight? This is a hard moment. I mean, there's a dignity at stake here. Are we certain that these Wright brothers can fly? Okay, imagine being the Wright brothers in this situation. Now, what's amazing about them is they are calm, they are at rest, and I know it was hard for them. But they're going to handle it in a way that I would say in many regards is a lot better than the way we handle it. This is really hard for us. We just want out of this situation. David McCullough says this, nothing went right for them, no pun intended. Nothing went right for them for the next 3 months. Could you imagine those 3 months? That's a Huffman Prairie season for you right there. 3 months of people coming out, and then people stop coming out because there's nothing to see here. And I mean, people are driving by on the trolley line, and they don't even look anymore. They don't care. There's nothing impressive here. These guys are a bunch of talk. Imagine what those 3 months were like. So June 10th, 1904, the machine hit the ground due to faulty steering. August 2nd, 1904, the tail smashed during landing. August 4th, 1904, tail wire disarranged. August 5th, 1904, struck ground at start. Oh boy. August 8th, 1904, wing hit ground before leaving track. August 10th, 1904, rudder smashed, propeller broken. Yeah, let's stay here. Huffman Prairie, what a wonderful place to be. These are hard seasons because there was a momentum in your life. There was something God was doing. You had a vision for it, and then you took a strong step forward to say, all right, let's move to the next step and let's build a better flyer. And the first thing that happened is it seems that what God has started doesn't work anymore. Did I just describe the Christian life? Where you are awakened, you are stirred, and then God takes you to Huffman Prairie, where you go back home after being at Ellerslie, and you're feeling so strong here. You got some flight, 12 seconds, 120 feet, I just flew. And your family, looks at you and goes, yeah, right. You're like, no, I did fly. And you get a little bad attitude over here, maybe a curt comment over here. And your family's like, so you really are a new person, huh? You're like, no, I am. Dear Lord, what's going on? Why am I having trouble applying what I learned at Kitty Hawk here? When you get to a Huffman Prairie moment, a lot of people give up. Did you just hear that? A lot of people don't do what the Wright brothers did, which is keep going. You see, in those moments where you start to feel that weight, that chagrin, that sense of the fact that this isn't actually working, maybe it wasn't real. Maybe we didn't fly in Kitty Hawk. Maybe it was a fluke. It was not a fluke. There is something very real that we have discovered. Let's keep going. Luther Beard, I gave this quote in the last one. This is during this time that he's referring to this little stretch of time. I used to chat with them in a friendly way, speaking of the Wright brothers. Used to chat with the Wright brothers in a friendly way and was always polite to them because I sort of felt sorry for them. They seemed like well-meaning, decent enough young men, yet there they were, neglecting their business to waste their time day after day on that ridiculous flying machine. Huffman Prairie. It's that place just beyond the Kitty Hawk 12-second miracle, where everything amazing you just experienced is being put to the test. Was it real? Is this actually possible? Should you give up? Is this really worth it? You ever been there? This is a part of the Christian life. God seems to even allow us into a Huffman Prairie, leads us even by a cloud into a Huffman Prairie. It's like, well, God, there's a 50-foot honey tree here. We've got a whole prairie dog town here. I mean, I can't fly here. You see, flight, if it's real flight, should work in Kitty Hawk winds and on sand and also on prairie dog towns. What you are learning needs to be applied in every zone. And if it only works in Kitty Hawk, are we sure it's real? That's a good question. If your Christianity only works at Ellerslie, is it real? God wants to teach you how to take flight and what you have learned from Christ in a season at Kitty Hawk and translate it into the prairie dog town, where not everyone expects you to succeed. In fact, some people you actually think are cheering for you to fail. That's a rougher spot to learn. There's parameters. It's a smaller little zone. You got eyes on you. You have people looking and watching, and you're like, God, come on, help me here. Many people give up when they reach Huffman Prairie. They accomplish something. They actually have something. Keep going. So here's some pictures of Huffman Prairie. It's not that we have a lot of great pictures. Remember, this is the beginnings of photography, and I can only imagine that the Wright brothers were not really that excited about taking a lot of pictures during this time. It's like when we have something to take a picture of, we'll take a picture, but we don't have anything right there. So it was just a big field with some trees in it and some prairie dogs. I think I have another picture. I mean, yeah, these aren't like some great picture which helps you like just wrap your brain around it and go, got it. Yep, totally understand it. But at least it gives you something, throws you a bone. There's this we've all spent time here, right? Huffman Prairie. We're all familiar with that place. Having done all, stand. What a great statement in the midst of this. Having done all, stand. See, there's certain things that we are responsible to do. Like, for instance, in the context here in Ephesians 6, to put on the armor. Have you put on the armor? Have you done all? You can imagine the Wright brothers. It's like, have you checked the engine? Have you checked the wiring? Have you checked the rudder? Have you tightened all the bolts? We've done everything we know to do. Well, then stand. Having done all, stand. You see, when you're going through this Huffman Prairie season, sometimes the things that you know work don't seem to be working like they're supposed to. Keep doing it. Do what you know to do. Do what you know works. Having done all, stand. Sometimes standing in the middle of Huffman Prairie, surrounded by a complete lack of evident progress, is the most noble, most amazing, most profound thing in all the world. Now, most people probably, when they look at the Wright brothers story, are not going to look at this exact chapter that I'm bringing up and saying, do you guys see that? That is profound. However, if any of you have been tested in a Huffman Prairie season, you should take note of it. What these guys are going to do through this season is actually, in my estimation, one of the most remarkable things they do in their entire lives. This is a difficult season. Most of us don't focus on it because there's no progress. It's like, what are they accomplishing? What they're accomplishing is they are continuing to move forward even though the jeering and the sneers and everything is increasing. And they have nothing to show. They have a flying machine and they know it flies. Why this one isn't flying, they can't quite figure it out. But these are some smart guys. And for whatever, there's a blur over this and this entire season. It's like out of this season is going to come forth flight for the world to see. But if they give up now, as most people do, what was all this work for? So here's a statement from J.R. Miller about having done all to stand. It requires a grander heroism to stand and wait and not lose heart and not lose hope, to submit to the will of God, to give up work and honors to others, to be quiet, confident, and rejoicing while the happy, busy multitude go on and away. It is the grandest life, having done all, to stand. Isn't that a beautiful statement? A.B. Simpson weighs in on this very concept. Now, they weren't talking about the Wright brothers in Huffman Prairie, but it sure does seem like they are. A.B. Simpson said it this way: there are two ways of getting out of a trial. One is to simply try to get rid of that trial and be thankful when it is over. The other is to recognize the trial as a challenge from God to claim a larger blessing than we have ever had, and to hail it with delight as an opportunity of obtaining a larger measure of divine grace. Thus, even the adversary becomes an auxiliary, and the things that seem to be against us turn out to be for the furtherance of our way. Surely this is to be more than conquerors through him who loved us. That is a profound quote. That there's two ways of approaching a Huffman Prairie. God, just get me out of this. Please get me out of this. I remember, and I've referenced this multiple times over the years, but it's a significant moment in my life where I was going through, it was about 48 months of extreme financial challenge where, I don't remember what it was, but it was the high 30s of months where at the end of the month, we didn't have the money to pay payroll. And out of those 48 months, not 1 month did we miss that. In other words, we always had what we needed, but it was always supernatural and it was always, I'm just going to say it, rather miserable. This is really hard. And in the midst of that, there was also other challenges that were hitting. I mean, it was just a very Huffman Prairie-ish sort of season. And there was nothing easy about the season. And there was something that I was dealing with that felt like a knife in my gut that morning as I'm taking a prayer walk. So I'm up really early, and I would always start my morning by walking 4 miles and praying. And as I was walking, I was asking God to remove that knife. It's like, God, I'm going to ask again, could you remove this knife, please? Please. It's like, give me back some sense of just normalcy in my life. This is so tense for my soul. And in the process, he was reminding me, in this very moment, he was reminding me of the closeness and the intimacy I have with him right now, in that moment. He's like, you know that the reason you have such a closeness with me right now is because of these trials. Because of this difficulty, that's why we have such a closeness. And then it's like a pause, or in a storytelling or a movie, we would call it a beat, where there's a thought. And then God leans in the way that only he can sort of share it with the soul. And it's something like, so do you want me to remove that? So if the reason I have this intimacy with God at this level is because of this challenge in my life, do you want me to remove the challenge, Eric? You know what I actually decided in that moment is that I want the challenge to remain if that is the byproduct of it. I actually made a decision in that moment, knowing full well the challenge that I was facing, and I decided that it was better to have the challenge and have that intimacy with God than to have him remove the challenge. I want you to think through the logic that we need to employ to recognize that Huffman Prairie, though we would like to fast forward it or skip it, is actually what brings us into a greater place of intimacy with God and into a greater power in our Christian life. Are you sure you want to skip Huffman Prairie? Can you remind me again what happened on December 17th, 1903? Because I could have sworn you said you two could fly. Not crash, but fly. I don't know whose voice that is. Is that the devil speaking to us? Is it a mocking voice? Is it even the voice of the Wright brothers themselves talking to themselves, saying, God, can you remind me again what happened on December 17th, 1903? Because I could have sworn that we flew, and not crashed, but flew. Why is it that we can't implement that same miracle here when people are watching? Why is that? You know, these are tremendous challenges, these exact moments in our life. Imagine David is anointed by the prophet Samuel. He's anointed to be king. And the next thing you know, he's sent back out to the sheep. All of Israel goes off to war. He's left behind. Could you imagine what's going on inside of him? It's like, God, was there really a prophet that came and anointed me with oil to be king of Israel? Because I'm just going to say it right now as I'm hanging out in Huffman Prairie, it sure doesn't feel like that's the case. But in those moments, what you do is you are resolute in your faith. God, you brought me here. I trust you. If you've designed me to fulfill this calling, then I know you will, even though right now my circumstances surrounding me sure aren't supporting it very well. Wilbur writes in his reply to many subsequent failures in front of everyone, this is what he said. He said, we've become a bit rusty at flying. That's a very gracious response, I have to admit. That's a very humble response. It's because you can imagine what they're feeling. First of all, flight is hard. It's very difficult to bull ride the wind. That's why no one's been able to succeed at it in the first place. But they had learned certain techniques that had actually enabled them to do something in Kitty Hawk. But they just couldn't figure out how to do it here on the prairie dog, land. Walter Werthner, who's a local Dayton science teacher, who was one of the characters that would come out and watch every now and then. Most people had given up on the brothers, but Walter Werthner would come out and just observe. There was nothing spectacular about these many trials, but the good humor of Wilbur after a spill out of the machine or a break somewhere or a stubborn motor was always reassuring. In other words, Wilbur, in the midst of this, has a good humor, that he has a chuckle or a smile. And that's actually something, if we could bottle whatever that is, that'd be pretty impressive for us to apply to our Huffman Prairie. Werthner continues, their patient perseverance, their calm faith in ultimate success, their mutual consideration of each other might have been considered phenomenal in any but men who were well-born and well-reared. These flights, or spurts at flying, they always made in turn, and after every trial, the two inventors, quite apart, held long and confidential consultation, with always some new gain. They were getting nearer and nearer the moment when sustained flight would be made. For a machine that could maintain itself aloft 2 minutes might just as well stay there an hour if everything were as intended. They know they're going to fly. They know this is going to work. And so even though you have so many jeers and sneers, even though no one seems to believe that this is ever going to work, to keep going, having done all to stand. The season of strange struggle. Now I'm emphasizing the word strange because that's the word the Bible uses. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So I'll give you the quote from 1 Peter 4. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. So here's our Huffman Prairie version of that scripture. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning your season on Huffman Prairie, as though some strange thing happened to you. You see, we look at Huffman Prairie as some kind of problem, as if it's a strange thing. Well, do not consider it strange. This is actually the pattern of Christ's sufferings, that out of his sufferings come glory. Out of that difficulty of a breaking actually comes victory. You do know that. That's the pattern of the kingdom, right? Letty Cowman, in Streams in the Desert, said the best things of life come out of wounding. This is a really fascinating list. Wheat is crushed before it becomes bread. Incense must be cast upon the fire before its odors are set free. Isn't that a beautiful statement? The ground must be broken with a sharp plow before it is ready to receive the seed. It is the broken heart that pleases God. The sweetest joys in life are the fruits of sorrow. Human nature seems to need suffering to fit it for being a blessing to the world. So, Huffman Prairie is part of what is going to bring out the beauty in the Wright brothers. It's part of what is going to actually cause them to succeed, as it does in all of us. What you are desiring, what you feel called to, actually needs a Huffman Prairie, because it makes less of you and more of God in the situation. It's trimming down Gideon's army from 30,000. You already thought that was small, to 300. But what follows that? Amazing. You see, if we're willing to follow God's pruning process, We go from 30,000, which we already felt was small enough, to 300, which is so ridiculous. It's like we don't even have words for it. It's like, God, what do you expect me to do with 300? He says, do you trust me? I do. Having done all, stand. Stand in faith then. And then amazing follows. Out of the Huffman Prairie season comes the greater breakthrough. And this is always the case. I emphasized always there. Always the case that out of the Huffman Prairie season comes the greater breakthrough. They had a breakthrough in Kitty Hawk, but God intends a greater breakthrough for our lives. But we have to be willing to take what we know to the prairie dog town. We have to be willing to take it where the 50-foot honey tree is. I don't know, honey maple. I don't remember what kind of tree it was, but it's there. That's where we have to take it. We have to take it back home. And that's not the easiest place to go with it. So Galatians 6:9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Okay, guys, we have our Huffman Prairie version of this. And let us not grow weary while enduring our time on Huffman Prairie, for in due season we shall truly fly if we do not lose heart. David McCullough says this. This is our breakthrough moment, guys. At last, on August 13, 1904, to their utter amazement, Wilbur flew over 1,000 feet, farther than any of the flights at Kitty Hawk, and 5 times what they'd been able to do thus far at Huffman Prairie. Boom. Can't you just feel the moment? It's like, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. One of these days it's going to work. And then suddenly, boom. That just happened. That just happened. This happened at Huffman Prairie too. This was even greater than what happened at Kitty Hawk. It happened here in this difficult zone. God broke through. Why the strange season? Listen to David in Psalm 119. This is quite the statement, guys. It is good for me that I've been afflicted. What an odd statement. I don't know how many of us would be willing to acknowledge that. But this word for afflicted could mean tried, humbled, put through the tests. It is good that I've been put through the tests. Those 3 months of seeming failure in front of all of Dayton, that was really good for me. Lest I think of myself as some brilliant inventor, God took me through 3 months of humiliation so that I would know the true source of this invention. And that's the same with all of us. It's interesting, but if we don't have a Huffman Prairie, we think it's us. If we don't have a Huffman Prairie, we want the glory for us because we think we accomplished something. But God uses a Huffman Prairie to move us out of the way and to make sure the glory is maintained where it's supposed to be. So here's our Huffman Prairie edition of David's line in Psalm 119. It's good for me that I've been on Huffman Prairie. Letty Cowman, we'll finish with this. Just a wonderful meditation. It is a remarkable circumstance that the most brilliant colors of plants are to be seen on the highest mountains in spots that are most exposed to the wildest weather. The brightest lichens and mosses and the loveliest gems of wildflowers abound far up on the bleak, storm-scalped peak. And is it not so with the Christian who is afflicted, tempest-tossed and not comforted? Till the storms and vicissitudes of God's providence beat upon him again and again, his character appears marred and clouded, but trials clear away the obscurity, perfect the outlines of his disposition, and give brightness and blessing to his life. There's something about us embracing our Huffman Prairie that allows us to move forward in the way that we desire, but in God's way, in God's time, with less of us so there can be more of him. Father, we just say thank you so much for your truth. Thank you for these examples that we could begin to wrap our own understanding around them, to live it, to apply it to our lives. Lord, we want this, and we thank you for these truths. It's in the precious name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.